we really do have a limited amount of time. And if we put everything on the list, even if you do things like a bucket list, you will never get to all of the things on the bucket list. So instead of putting 30 things on the list, what if you put 2 or 3 and really, really focused on those 2 or 3 things? Because you're going to be happier overall if you stop trying to do everything.
Hello everyone, this is Wendy Pitts Reeves, and I am so excited to bring to you a really cool interview today that I'm doing. It's a little bit different. If you are a regular listener or you've been watching my videos, then you know that often what we talk about here are how to build an ideal private practice that works as well for you as it does for your clients. Because I know you guys, you're really good at taking care of everyone else. You're not so great at taking care of yourself. Today, though, I have a special guest that I'm bringing to you who is really different from anyone else I've ever had before. So I want to introduce you to her briefly, and then I'll let her introduce herself because she can do a better job of it than I do. So today, sitting here with me, actually in my office, is Dr. Anne Waple, who is of all things, not a clinician, not a private practitioner. She is actually a climate consultant and a climate scientist. She is the founder of Earth's Next Chapter, which I'm sure she'll tell you about. And I'm going to let her introduce herself, and then I'll tell you why the heck we're talking to a climate scientist today. And I didn't mention something kind of important. She's also my wife. So there you go. Hi, Anne. Say hi.
Hi. It's so great to be here with you upstairs in our house.
In my office. Absolutely. So tell everybody who you are and what you do.
So I am a climate scientist, as Wendy mentioned, and that's been my career. Went to graduate school in the United States. My accent is not from here, as you might determine throughout the interview. I came over from England to the US to go to graduate school, and have been working in the climate world ever since. So worked for the federal government for about 12 years for NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and worked a good deal on climate information to support policy. So I ended up in Washington for a good while, was there during the transition from President Bush to President Obama, and we were helping to figure out what information they needed in order to craft climate policy. So that was super fun, very interesting, and lots of hard work. Mm-hmm. And I left the government in about 2013 and went to work with a nonprofit, and initially as a consultant, and ended up working for them full-time as a vice president and then acting president. And then that was not really what I wanted, and started my own business for real in about 2016, and have been consulting since then.
So what she has in common with you guys is she is an entrepreneur who runs her own business. It's maybe a different kind of business than what you do, but she still understands a lot of the things that all of us deal with all the time, every day, as the CEO of our own show. So you may be wondering why the heck I thought it would be helpful to talk to a climate consultant, even though I have a bit of a bias where she's concerned. I will own that. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is I know that you guys, not you guys, I want to know that Anne herself has been through a really transformative process since she did start her own business back in 2014. And recently she read a book that's called 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals, which cracks me up. It's by a guy named Oliver Burkeman, and I will certainly put a link to that in the notes down below. But Anne read that book, and we talk about books a lot in this house, and she was so taken with it that the conversations that we had as a result, I thought you guys would enjoy. Because as healers, we tend to focus so much on other people, but we cannot serve them if we're not in a good place ourselves. So I thought it would be kind of cool to share with you some of the conversations that Anne and I have had about this book in particular. And then I want to take a look today about what it means to live intentionally and on purpose, okay? Because when you start a business, it's really easy for things to get away from you. And before you know it, all you're doing is focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. But that's not why you started a business. You started a business because you have a vision for something you want to create. You have a dream that you want to make real. And I want to encourage you as you do that to reflect on who you are and who you are becoming in the context of what you do. So I want you to reevaluate what you want your life to look like and how your business supports that while you're writing your own next chapter. We talk about writing next chapters quite a lot here. So that's why we're doing this today. I think you'll find that Anne's got some pretty interesting thoughts to share that I think will be helpful to everybody here. So I was going to ask you why you started a business, but you've already talked about that. Life was pretty crazy and intense when you were working for the federal government. And you wanted to have more control, right, over how you lived your life, like literally how your days went and what you did. So why don't you just dive in and tell us a little bit about this book, some of the insights you gained from it, and then we'll go from there. I want to talk about designing your ideal life.
Sure. Well, so in terms of starting the business, first of all, I was looking for a little bit more control and a little bit more personal impact, as opposed to collective impact. That the federal government has lots of money and weight behind it, and we could do lots of really great things.
Right.
There wasn't a lot of personal flexibility to be myself in that role. There are lots of rules when you work for the federal government.
Yeah.
So, and completely appropriate rules. So, and I think I was 38, 39, something like that, when I decided to leave. And I realized, and there was a project coming to an end. I was working on the National Climate Assessment, and my particular role in that was coming to an end. And I would have been able to move into something else, but I realized if I didn't make a change right then, I would get stuck in another project, and it would be much harder to make that change later. So that was the timing of why.
So you were at a crossroads, and you were like, now's the time to make a decision.
Right.
If I want something different.
Right. And sort of realizing that life can be full of all sorts of different experiences, and it doesn't all have to be in the same place, even when we're having good impact. Yeah. So, but just recently, and I'll start with the book and sort of work backwards with that. So this book, 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals, it also made me crack up, and I wondered how morbid this book might be, because it didn't sound like it was going to be super fun. But it turned out to be really funny, very clear and insightful, and made me think about so many different things related to how I show up for my own work now, what's important moving forward, what's work versus not work.
Right.
And so it really brought several different questions right to the fore that I had been just playing around with at the back of my mind up until then.
So you were so it made you think of the thing that kept coming up to me when we were talking about it is essentially what I haven't read the book, y'all. I'm going to, but just from hearing Anne talk about it, I want to. But you were talking about how his whole point is our time is limited.
Right.
So we need to be conscious and intentional about what we do with the time that we've got, right?
Yeah.
So what makes it worth it? What makes getting up every morning worth it? And how do you want this day to be? Right.
Yeah, well, it comes at a particularly good time of my life, I think, in middle age. And so I'm very conscious of how I've spent the first half of my life and looking towards the next half. So there's part of that, too, is that natural reevaluation period in the middle of your life. But it really made me think about it. Sort of three things came up as I was reading this book that related entirely to running my own business and creating a much more intentional life than I had up to this point. Even though I had made good decisions and started my own business, and there was still this going along on a daily basis without sort of attaching myself to the bigger plan, bigger space I wanted to occupy.
Right.
So the three questions that came up to me as I was reading it was, what did I learn during the first half of my life that now no longer applies? What do I need to unlearn or shed? And a lot of that had to do with how I had been taught to show up as a climate scientist or a climate consultant even. What does the industry say I should be showing up as versus how do I want to be showing up, and how do I unlearn the process of being this clear, objective, serious, sciencey person,
right,
as opposed to my natural state, which is, certainly, hopefully clear, mostly objective, but also personal and
human.
Yeah.
So one of the first things
question
you had to do was to unlearn the training of your industry.
Yes.
Right, which I think is super important. As I want to focus on that for just a second. You had to. There's a certain way that scientists are supposed to act.
Right, especially federal scientists.
Especially federal scientists, and there are certain in order to be credible and taken seriously.
Yes.
There's a certain kind of gravitas that you're supposed to bring to the conversation, and although that serves a point, it didn't fit who you are personally. And there has to be a way to share information that is credible and real and valid and important, but still be human and understandable and translatable to right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so it wasn't that I couldn't be, have a little bit of humanity as my federal climate scientist self.
Right.
But you're not really encouraged to share your own opinions. And I realized it just really fairly recently that I didn't even know what my opinions were around some of the work that I want to highlight now as a consultant.
So guys, for those of you who are listening, where this applies to you is you are taught certain things in graduate school, you are taught certain things in whatever training programs you've been to. I want to address this because when you start your own practice, you may find that you instinctively sort of follow the rules, such as they are, that for what you think the way you think you're supposed to serve people. But I think one of the first questions I want you to ask yourself is exactly what Anne just said. What do you need to unlearn? Because for you to design an ideal practice that works for you, that may very well mean that you too have a shedding process to go through where you decide, this is the way everyone does it. That doesn't mean that's how I want to do it. So I just want to put a pin in that for a second.
Yeah, it's sort of drawing on all of your experience is good, but without being limited by how that fits into the rules of the industry. I think is what. Yeah. And I'm still doing that. So it's a process, and maybe it's always going to be a process for the rest of my working life. I don't know. Yeah. So, but once you finish with that question, or at least once you think about that question, there's then the natural next question, which is, well, once I unlearn things, what's still there? What's left behind? Like, what do I really need to embrace? And so it made me ask myself about, well, what is uniquely me? What am I bringing to my role now that is nothing to do with my training, nothing to do with expectations from the industry, nothing to do with even what the world needs from a climate consultant. But what is it that I am bringing that is fundamentally and very clearly me when I show up, whether it's in writing or in person or even on a podcast.
I love that.
Yeah. So it ended up with me trying to find that voice. Yeah. And so that's where understanding what you think about things, what your opinions are, how you relate to different aspects of the industry becomes much more important. So you know what to reject and what to keep. And I had not done that work until fairly recently. Or at least it was beginning, but it wasn't fully.
Well, like you said, this is a constant evolution, right? So you figure it out and you live with that for a little while, and then you start asking the questions again, you figure out it again. Right. And one of the things that you said to me the other night when we were talking about this is you said, y'all, if it helps you any, y'all, I'm a social worker married to a scientist, which makes no sense at all to me. So talk about like that alone speaks volumes to me, because one of the things that you said to me the other night was that as you were working on finding your voice and figuring out who you were as a unique individual in this world and in this work, you said that you found that you were somewhere in the middle between the math and the magic. Yeah. Which is such a great phrase. I love that.
I was not really a scientist. Yeah. In the sense I I was, nerdy enough to hang with the scientists, but not nerdy enough to be there full time, And so there's a very human element to what we're doing planetarily, and actually the 3 themes of Earth's next chapter, the new group that I'm starting, is people, planet, and places. And there's a very clear reason why we start with people. And if you talk to most scientists, they're not going to start with people. They're going to start with the atmospheric system.
That's right.
And so bringing that human element in, the uniqueness that is us, and the way that humanity, the way we behave, all of these, the cool things that we do, the stupid things that we do.
I might say some of the social work aspects of it, actually.
Yes, absolutely. It is social science.
Yes.
If you want to still stick with the science.
Yeah.
But it's also just relating to people. So that's an element that I recognize was fundamentally within me, fascinating to me, interesting to me in every way. And I had to make my contributions as much about that as what I knew from the scientific world.
And you had to incorporate that into your business. And so when you developed Earth's Next Chapter, a membership group for folks who are committed to being more intentional about how we address climate change, right? Building in that element was something that you brought to the table that would not be typical necessarily for a scientist. So this is part of your unique voice.
Yes.
And
it wasn't even necessarily a deliberate attempt to not be typical. It's just that if I'm really true to my unique self, it's never going to be typical.
Yes.
Because you're bringing something truly yourself to the table. And that includes things like bringing my sense of humor to the table, which is not something that you typically find in conversations about climate change.
Guys, you can relate to this. Yeah. So say more about that. So you're dealing with a really heavy subject that has a lot of darkness to it.
Sometimes, yes. And even the people within the field have a hard time bringing a little levity or lightness to the role.
I'm pretty sure my tribe can understand that and relate to that.
Yes, and yet it is 100% necessary, because if people are weighed down by this, we will never take the sort of action that we need. We need to look forward with hope and enthusiasm and innovation and all of the things that we need to create a better life, not just avoid a worse one.
Absolutely.
So bringing that.
That's your message.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't solve problems just by focusing on problems.
Oh my gosh, y'all. We can't solve she says can't solve problems by focusing on problems. And guys, as healers, I'm hoping you can relate to this a little bit, because this is another aspect of how I think you can take something away from this for your practice. I think that we as an industry are also so often caught up in the problems of those that we serve that it's easy for us to get weighed down by that. And I think that the opportunity that we have as a business owner, as a practice owner, is that we can shift the conversation by not going there, right? And by what Anne is talking about finding your unique voice, your unique abilities, and by doing things your way is kind of where I want to go with that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it made me realize what I was bringing to the table, other than simply the training and the expertise. It's certainly my own character and personality, but it's also a network of people that I've developed over 25 years of working in the industry that now turns out to be helpful for other people if I can connect them up with the right people. Or I found myself actually doing a little coaching, which I've made into something more deliberate. And I'm loving that, which I would never in a million years have imagined, even a few years ago, let alone 5 or 10 years ago. So, but that is now a place where I can share my own perspectives.
And that's a place where, since you read this book, you've allowed yourself to sort of experiment with a little bit more. So you've started offering coaching as part of your work, brand spanking new.
Right. And so one of the key messages from this book is that we really do have a limited amount of time. And if we put everything on the list, even if you do things like a bucket list, which is very popular for people, you will never get to all of the things on the bucket list. So instead of putting 30 things on the list, what if you put 2 or 3 and really, really focused on those 2 or 3 things? Because you're going to be happier overall if you stop trying to do everything.
Yeah.
And that was, it really made me sort of hone down, well, what is it that I want to contribute in the next 10, 20 plus years?
Yeah.
Not just at work, but everywhere.
Everywhere.
And how do those things merge in the way I view life?
Yes.
So,
not just in your work, but in your whole life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which made me realize a third question that I had to answer, right? Which was, how do I be committed, dedicated, impactful in my work, effective, and also not be defined by it? Which has been certainly a challenge for me in the first half of my career. So, I was an analyst, and then I was a manager, and then I was a director, and then I was a VP, and then I was a president, and then,
Right, all the titles.
I had all the titles.
Yeah.
And when you suddenly strip away what other people call you, how other people think of you, you actually have to define yourself slightly differently. And I really struggled with what to call myself.
Yeah.
What am I? I sort of came down on consultant as a sort of catch-all.
I can relate to that because I went through some of that when I started coaching business owners. It was easy to define myself as an LCSW. Like that's a title that had a certain amount of credibility, that had some prestige even to it. And when I began coaching business owners, like I didn't want to say I was a business coach because, good Lord, that sounds so incredibly boring, right? And like I don't want to be like everybody else. But you're right; it is so much more than a title or a word. It's really who you are and the energy that you bring to the conversation, to the table, to the work.
Absolutely.
Right? Or to your life.
Yes, and so in different parts of this book that have helped refine some of these questions for me, one of the chapters is about how to step away from your work and enjoy some of that time as well. So, and he points out in there that a lot of our culture suggests that rest is good because it makes us more productive. And he said, sure, but rest is good because it's rest. No, it's not only so that we can be better employees or better entrepreneurs or better workers. Yeah. It's good for its own sake. And then so I was like, well, what does that look like if we're really taking rest and being present in the alternative to work? Right. And it's not just an alternative to work, there's a whole other avenue of things to explore. Yeah. What do I want to spend that time doing? No,
so where have you gone with that? How has that impacted you? Like, what are you thinking about how you define outside of your work?
Well, it makes me think about, well, what do I want to be good at? What do I actually enjoy? How do I want to contribute in other ways as well? Most of the area that I'm exploring right now is that there is no work and life. There's no work-life balance. It is almost all, well, it's life. Part of your life is about contributing for payment, right? And part of it is contributing in other ways. And it's the contribution is not just to other people; it's also to yourself.
Yes.
So how?
Wait a minute. Let's put a pin in that. The contribution is not just to other people; it is also to yourself. And where I go with that is like it's what makes you happy, just because it makes you happy.
Yeah, well, actually, one of the things that he talks about in the book, and he quotes a guy called James Hollis, which if you're in the mental health field, you might even know this guy because he's a therapist. But one of the questions James Hollis asks is, if you're trying to make a decision about what to do next or a big move that you're trying to make, he says, don't ask what makes me happy, because there's so many things that are fraught in that question. There's so many ways you can answer it, and you don't really know what's going to make you happy. Okay. He says, ask, does this next move expand me? Yes. Or contract me? Yes. And that was an amazing question for me to think about. Yes. In terms of what I wanted to do for the work and outside the work. Yes. So. Oh,
I love that so much. Yeah. And guys, so this is a perfect. I've got to mention, 2 weeks ago, I did a whole episode on on how to process when something doesn't go well in your business. And the main thing I talked about in that episode, it was episode 42. I talked about how to mine for the expansion as a part of the experience. And in fact, I had a little tool that I downloaded for you, or I created for you. You can go back and you can find that. I can put a link to that down below as well. But exactly what she's talking about here. Look, is this something that expands me as a human being, as a business owner?
Yep.
Is this something that is contracting? That's where I'm shrinking in some way.
Yes.
And I will say that you and I have talked about this a lot in terms of our lives.
Yep.
And I think it's okay to say this has been a big part of what we have been doing and how we want to live while we are running our businesses.
Absolutely. So it's that balance of where we spend our time, who we work with, and what we do with that time.
Yeah.
And so it made me think, well, what's kind of the fun experiment, the adventure in all of this? That's the sort of the expansion, and that feels a lot more doable when we think of it as, this would be fun to experiment with. This would be great, and I can think of this as an adventure.
I love that.
Versus, I'm stuck in the grind. I hate getting to my desk in the morning. I can't stand this client, but she pays me well. So there's so many different ways that we can move towards that expansion side of the equation.
So we need to start pulling this together. So
we can't go on all day.
We can't go on all day.
Okay.
And this is part of my job is to make sure we don't. So I want to where I want to go with this, guys. I want those of you who are listening. I want to encourage you. One of the ways that Anne and I have done this is individually, of course, and I hope you will do this. I constantly want you to be asking yourself, is this still working for me? And if it is, great. And if it's not, what could I play with? What can I play with here that might be, like what you just said that triggered this was, that's fun. That's experimental. That's an adventure. Well, what if that works? And what if that works? And you never know what's going to work if you don't try it. So in your practice, whether it's how you're pricing your services, whether it's how you're delivering your services, whether it's who you're working with, whether it is the hours that you're working, whether it's the format, whether you're doing it virtually or in person or some blend, whatever and however you are doing your work, I want you to constantly give yourself permission on a regular basis to kind of check in and go, is this still working? And if it's not, what do I want to change? And in your own life as well, I want you to do that. So some of you have seen me doing this for the last 6 or 8 months or so. One of the things that we've been experimenting with is whether we can travel and work at the same time. So one of the things we did was we bought a small camper, a little teardrop camper back in the spring. And there have been a few weeks in the last few months when I have very consciously and on purpose experimented with whether I could continue my counseling work and my coaching work even while we're on the road, even when I was doing it from inside a camper, which we've done, right?
Yeah, worked out well.
Worked out well. I mean, there were pros and cons to it, but it worked out well, except for the day that the storm blew up and the tarp got destroyed while Anne was in the middle of it because I was having counseling sessions. But that's another story.
That's an adventure.
So let's just say, to pull it together, is there anything in particular, any final thoughts that you might have for other entrepreneurs who are in a service-related industry that is kind of like a final thought for you or a final word of advice for you for where this takes you?
I think one of the biggest takeaways for me in this whole process of several years of getting into the business is that it's tempting always to fall back on actions that make us more productive or more efficient or that fit more into the day, that they help us see more clients or get more money. Yeah. And all of that is fine, but it's not as important as making sure that you're efficiently working on the right thing. Yeah. So if you're efficiently working on the wrong thing, you'll still be miserable. And so taking the time to really sit back and let yourself understand who you are and what you work on as a result of that. Right. Is much more important than trying to figure out what you want to work on and then trying to make it work for you.
So where can people learn more about you and what you do?
Well,
Because we have a couple of budding climate scientists in the group.
Yes, and if you are, come see me. I'm doing coaching. I have a website. It's called earthsnextchapter.com. And this is where I'm beginning to talk about all of the work that we're expanding into with Earth's Next Chapter. And you can contact me there on the website, and I would love to hear from people.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Guys, I want to say that if you like this episode and you're enjoying this conversation and you're, depending upon where you're seeing it, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you can share it with a colleague or a friend, I would love that. And of course, I love it when you subscribe to the channel so that you can get more content like this, because I have a lot more coming your way next year. And what I want to close with, I was thinking, I just heard this recently. Often you may hear the phrase when you're the concept of deciding what you want to be, do, and have as part of your own vision process. As we wind down the year and we look into what's coming next year, it's a really good time of year, in fact, to be thinking about these kinds of things. Who am I? What do I want for myself? I myself am going to be working with another friend next week to set our goals for the next quarter. I'm doing that right now myself, and I hope you are as well. But here's where I want to go with this. When we talk about be, do, and have, you have to do that in a certain, it's not what do I want to have, and so in order to have that, what do I have to do? And then from that, where will I become? It really has to happen the other way. The first thing I want you to ask yourself is, who do I want to be? And if I am that person, and I want you to make decisions and live from that place now. If this is who I want to be, when we talk about what you want your practice to look like and what you want your life to look like, I want you to start with, who do you want to be? I am someone who functions in a certain way, lives at a certain income level, impacts the world in this certain way. And if I am indeed that person, then here's what I do. And because this is what I do, this is what I have. I want you to think about that. I want you to think about what it takes to bring your best self to your work, because when you do that, everyone around you benefits, y'all, and it starts with you. And if you have your own favorite process for this, by all means, talk to me in the comments below. Let me know what you think about this and how you are going to, where can you unlearn from the ways your industry has taught you? What's left when you do that? What's your unique voice? What is the awesomeness that you bring to the table? And who are you when you are dedicated to your work but not defined by your work? What does that mean? Thank you, everybody, for being here. I hope you have an awesome day. I hope you have a great week, and I can't wait to hear from you what you think about all this. And thank you, Anne, for being here and humoring me with this. Take care, everybody. Have a good one. I'll see you next time.